Hello, everyone, and welcome to our other panel on understanding the UN with our prized guest here, Ms. María Fernanda Espinosa, former President of the United Nations General Assembly. We're very happy to have her today. My name is Philippe, I'm Director of World MUN Day, and with me is Mariam.
Hi, everyone, I'm María MUN.
And we're very happy to have found a time to talk to Ms. Espinosa. And we're sure all of you are as equally excited to be able to talk to us. So thank you for joining us today.
I'm very pleased to be with you, both Philippe and Mariam. Very happy to be engaging with this very young and interested audience in how the UN works and how, why the UN is so irreplaceable.
Thank you very much. So as a quick background for those listening, Ms. Espinosa has an educational background in social science and political science, and, which I think is very impressive to note as well, also poetry. She's a distinguished writer. She was an associate professor, beginning her career and advisor on biodiversity, climate change, and indigenous people's rights, which was very relevant for her career in politics and diplomacy. She served as foreign minister of Ecuador, in a range of ministries, and was the Ecuadorian representative to the United Nations in Geneva twice in the late 2000s and in 2014 to 2017. In 2018, she was elected to be the president of the 73rd United Nations General Assembly, running from 2018 to 2019, in which she pioneered some very important programs on the UN Declaration of the Rights of Peasants, Compact on Refugees, which reverberated around the world, and on regular migration. So we're here today to try and get a bit of an insight into her life, her experiences, and her role as UNGA president. The question I'd like to start with, which I think might be quite interesting, is where did you first learn about the United Nations?
Well, the truth is that I have to be very honest with you, Philippe, but I don't recall when, I had this revelation, but I've always, since my very early ages, I was very interested in what was happening in the world in general, very worried. I was a very little girl, and I remembered watching with horror the Vietnam War, for example, and I've always been interested in the world in a way, in human rights. Very early in my career, I engaged with indigenous rights, and of course, we knew that a very important part of the struggle was internationally, and I got connected to the international world very early. And if you care about the world, if you care about current global challenges, the UN has center stage as the place and the institution that brings together the 193 states from around the world. And basically, the role of the UN is to comply with its founding charter and work on human rights, on peace and security, and sustainable development.
Thank you. And so you quite quickly, actually, and then sort of the career when you're representative to Ecuador and Geneva, what was that experience like, representing just one of 193, though of course all are equal? Apologies, background noise. What was that experience like, going into these huge halls where you think, well, I have to represent my country in this giant forum? What was your approach?
The truth is that I was ambassador of my country to New York first, and then to Geneva.
Apologies.
And basically, I was very happy. I was first appointed as ambassador in New York, and I was very happy because I was the first female ambassador of my country appointed to the UN in New York, and the first woman ambassador in Geneva as well. So I felt I had, a big responsibility because of that. And of course, the UN is a big place, but I think the size of the country, the square kilometers, the GDP of a country, you know, it doesn't matter when you have a clarity of what you want to do and what you want to achieve, what is your agenda, what are your priorities. And I think that Ecuador was a very important player in the multilateral arena, and we were extremely creative, very active, even if we had small missions, but in Geneva, in human rights, for example, Ecuador was leading the negotiation of a treaty on transnational corporations and human rights. I was the chair myself there in New York. We were at the forefront of, in 2008, 2009, we were really a leading country in the responses to the 2008-9 international financial crisis. And we were extremely vocal, extremely active, calling for a global fiscal pact, taxes that were fair and transparent to fight illicit financial flows, et cetera, et cetera. So we have, you know, as a country, we have had a strong voice at the UN. We were very active on the migration agenda. Ecuador is unique because it's a country of origin of migration, a country of destination, but also a country of transit. And I think that we are, you know, in the avant-garde of acknowledging in our constitution, we have the category of universal citizenship for, you know, regardless of what country you come from. And so we were very, very active on the migration agenda, on the refugee agenda as well. Ecuador for a long time was the first receiver of refugees in the Western Hemisphere, with a long history of hosting Colombian refugees in the country. So, you know, at the UN, it doesn't matter, you know, how big your country is, but you can be at the forefront, you can lead, you can bring innovation to the UN. As I said, even if you're small in square kilometers, but not in ideas.
Thank you so much for, you know, such a wonderful, elaborate answer. And I'm just going to use that to follow up. So you just said that, you know, the UN is a place where you can bring innovation to the table, but the UN also, like you said, is a big place. And so how did you first get involved with the United Nations and the organization of the General Assembly as a whole, so individually?
Well, I have to say that when I spent some time in Switzerland, I work for the World Conservation Union. You know, it has its headquarters in Switzerland. I worked on the policy section, and I followed negotiations, for example, at WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization. I followed the negotiations of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I followed the negotiations of the Convention on Biological Diversity as a policy advisor. So I was very much connected to the work of the UN from the IUCN perspective. And when I became foreign minister, I knew already that the multilateral work was critical to our foreign policy, and that the big challenges could only be addressed and resolved through multilateral channels, especially if you are a small country. That's the place to go when you want, for example, to have a global framework on migration that I had the privilege to adopt during my presidency, the Global Compact for an orderly, it's called regular orderly migration, and also the Compact on refugees as well. So I think it was very early in my career. And I recall, and I have to be very, very honest, but when I was in high school, my first years of university, the UN was something that we felt very, far away, wasn't part of the our daily lives at school, I have to say. But this has changed, and Model UN, the Model UN experiences are, amazing. They are, they really engage the younger generations in the work of the UN. They make them understand better why the UN is so important, etc. And I have engaged as ambassador, as president of the General Assembly, in so many of the experiences of the UN models. I have engaged with, UN models and UN associations wherever I traveled, and in the United States and everywhere.
It's very inspiring to hear everything you're talking about, but also the message of hope that, if anyone is listening to this, they can feel that, what, maybe I can do that. But one thing I'd like to follow up with is, what is something you wanted to work on within your involvement in the GA or in the UN in general, but you were not able to push or work on during your time?
Well, we have to acknowledge that in the UN, in the multilateral scene, processes are very slow. Negotiations take very long. Just imagine that, I don't know, but perhaps 30 years of negotiation for the reform of the Security Council, more than 10 years to negotiate the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Well, processes take long time. We are in COP26, meaning 26 years of climate negotiations, and yet we are not able to get our act together. The climate arithmetics, to know how much we need to reduce emissions, how much we need to invest in adaptation in developing countries, how much money, et cetera, et cetera. So the processes are slow and sometimes disappointing, but once you see the light at the end of the tunnel, it's such a sense of achievement, and it is something important. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants that I started when I was ambassador in Geneva. And I would say 5 or 6 years later, I was, I had the privilege to gavel the adoption of the declaration. As a young professional in Geneva, I used to go and participate in the negotiations, in the drafting of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And when I was minister, 10 or more years later, in 2007, I had to write the instruction to our ambassador in New York to vote in favor of the declaration. So it takes a long time, but it's worthwhile. And there are many issues. In one, let me tell you, Mariam, one of the things that is a little bit frustrating is that there is a reform process. This is a little boring, but a reform process to upgrade and improve the work of the General Assembly, which is the big parliament. And it's funny because I was the co-facilitator of that process when I was ambassador in New York in 2008, 2009. So I chaired this working group. It's called the Revitalization of the General Assembly. And I thought we did a great job because basically it's to improve the working methods, the transparency, the efficiency of the General Assembly. So we made a big stride, I think, in terms of the improving and modernizing the General Assembly. And I come back several years later as the president of the General Assembly, and the progress was very tiny. And during my presidency, I put a lot of energy and effort into the revitalization of the General Assembly process. And the outcome was, I have to be honest, but disappointing, because some member states, they feel like it's not that important. But I feel it is important because the General Assembly is the norm setting space, is the parliament, is where the policy guidance is provided to countries. During my year, we passed close to 400 resolutions during 1 year. So who looks at the resolutions? Who make sure that they are implemented, that they're worthwhile, that all the political energy, the time of diplomats was worthwhile. For example, the way the office of the president of the General Assembly, the institutional support to the office is very weak still. So there's a lot of to do. Sometimes this seem like bureaucratic, concerns, but they're more than that, because they are very much connected to the efficiency, to the results-oriented organization that we all want. So this, if you ask me, something that has disappointed me, perhaps that. But there is political will. The process continues, and I really hope that there is going to be agreement on the key issues.
Thank you. One of the items you were very involved in as the first woman from Latin American Caribbean to preside over the UNGA was, of course, empowerment of women, both within the United Nations, diplomacy, but also far wider than that, making sure that in all of the things the UNGA passed, there was an expression and understanding of the role of women and youth in there. How did you approach the integration of obviously such a vital topic in your presidency of the UN, the empowerment of women, and how do you see that since? Do you see improvements having been made since 2018, or do you believe there's still more work to be done within the UN to include women at every level?
Well, I think that the level of awareness, of commitment is increasing. This is obvious. And basically, one of the priorities during my presidency was gender equality, precisely, and women's rights. And basically, the effort has to start in-house. We have to do a domestic effort to ensure that higher level positions at the UN have gender parity. The Secretary General is a feminist ally. He promised to appoint women, and to achieve gender parity in the higher level of positions of the UN, and he achieved that gender parity. We work hard to make sure that panels, discussions, etc., had a gender parity, pushing to have more female ambassadors at the UN. And there's several groupings at the UN. There's the group of gender champions, which I was, of course, a part of that. There is the group of friends of gender equality. So there is a lot of movement, and it is not about optics only. It is about, fairness, democracy, equality, and very much involved on the women, peace and security agenda. Women as absolutely critical actors in the peace and security agenda, not only as victims, which they are, unfortunately, but also as change makers, as peacemakers, as peace builders. More women in the peacekeeping operations of the UN, because the percentage is very low. I think it continues to be 7-8% in our peacekeeping operations. So when you speak about women's rights and when you speak about gender equality, it's inside the UN, but of course outside too. It means that whatever the UN does in the field through the country teams of the UN, in UN diplomatic entourage, negotiators, etc., you need a special lens, gender equality lens, and a women's rights lens. When you're speaking about, you name it, financing for development, for developing countries, for example, investment in women's rights, concern about decent jobs for women, and the intergenerational perspective, young women, girls, in everything we do, because we are 50% of the world's population. So this is the ratio that we need in positions of power. I organized for the first time the first meeting of women heads of state and government when I was president. So they came to New York, and the experience was incredible. And they came, they had exchanges with young interns. You know, I don't like the word coaching, but exchanging ideas, and I really I'm a witness of the power of intergenerational dialogue myself. So it's a building thing that you have, you know, wherever you go. It's an acute eye that you need to have, because yeah, it's there is a lot of homework to do in gender equality and women's rights still.
So, I mean, we can tell by now your passion and devotion to including women in, you know, positions of power and spaces of power, and making sure their voices are heard. And we also know that you are a supporter of MUNs in general, as you previously mentioned earlier. But so one question I'd have about that is, how do you view youth engagement in the United Nations and MUN in general?
Well, I think that it's unbelievable. I have witnessed myself, you know, an exponential increase of awareness and commitment to making sure that younger generations have a place, a voice at the United Nations. And the recent report that the Secretary General produced, called Our Common Agenda, has very much this intergenerational lens. And there is an office, a youth envoy, as you know, of the United Nations, but the proposal is to enhance the office, to improve the office of the UN envoy, but also to create a new role, which is going to call something like the UN envoy for future generations. And as a built-in mechanism. And the truth is that the voices of young people, their active engagement in UN business every day has increased exponentially. And if you look at what is happening now in Glasgow during the COP, you have all these young activists, but, you know, young professionals, young scientists working, taking part, being at the decision-making table on the climate negotiations. And the same is true, for example, when you talk about violence against women, when you speak about implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. There are different groupings. The Secretary General himself has a special youth advisory group that supports and advises his work on climate change, for example. So it is part of the new political landscape of the United Nations. Of course, as it needs improvement, it needs to be perhaps more institutionalized, but it's there. And I think that compared to 10 years ago to what we have today, it's much, much, much better.
Thank you. I'm aware of the time. I know we don't have very long left. So I wanted to end with a question that I always enjoy ending with, which is, what are you hopeful for in the future generally?
Well, I would like to paraphrase late Secretary General Kofi Annan. He used to say that he's a stubborn optimist. And I am a stubborn optimist. I think that the UN is irreplaceable, that the UN has made the world a better place for sure. We have, and of course, as every human-made institution, it needs improvement. And I think we are living a special moment of reinvention, a window of opportunity to upgrade, to rejuvenate, to retool the United Nations, to make it more, more responsive to the current challenges. The organization was created 76 years ago. The world has changed, the geopolitical landscape has changed, and I think that institution needs to adapt to what is happening now and today. And that includes, of course, what we are calling a more inclusive networked multilateralism, where the voice, the agency of younger generations, where gender equality, where indigenous peoples, where the private sector have a voice and a say. And so I'm optimistic, and I think that this has, we have witnessed the worst global health crisis in the last 100 years, health crisis combined with an economic crisis, with a climate crisis. But crises are, also an opportunity. And again, I say, I am an optimist. I think that together with young change makers, with young forward thinkers, we are going to, use this opportunity to improve our United Nations. And the best way is to have the United Nations be relevant for the people it serves. And we are the people. So we should really remember the first phrase of the UN Charter, we the peoples. So we the peoples are responsible for making sure that the UN delivers, and delivers for all, leaving no one behind.
Thank you very much. Do you have any final, maybe 30 seconds for those watching? Anything you want to say to hopefully the young change makers who'll be listening?
Well, basically to say that it's the sign that the times are changing for the good, of course, is this World Model UN Day. It's
Thank you.
having, all these young people dreaming, building, contributing to making the UN a better institutions, a more modern, more effective, more transparent, more inclusive organization. So you have a big responsibility, and I am really happy that you're taking that as a task and as a commitment, because you are in charge. You are in charge, and I feel personally, I feel very comfortable to know that the younger generations are in charge. You're intelligent, you are capable, you are creative, and we rely very much on you.
Thank you very much for joining us. And all I can do is say that again. It's been fantastic talking to you. Maria?
Okay, all the best to you, Mariam and Philippe, and enjoy this November 13th. It's going to be a great day, and I'll be with you, even if not physically, but my soul and my thoughts will be with all of you.
Extremely kind to say that. Thank you very much, Ms. Espinosa. Have a wonderful rest of the day and a wonderful time where you are, and the same to all of our listeners.
Thank you, Philippe. Thank you, Mariam. See you very soon, I hope. Bye.
Thank you.